I know many of you are concerned about our current response to the coronavirus pandemic, but more importantly, how prepared are we for a potential resurgence in the fall or a second wave? I chatted with Dr. Luciana Borio, who served on the National Security Council's pandemic response team. She'll tell us exactly how prepared we are. I think you'll want to listen.
Dr. Borio, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, John. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're an expert in emergency preparedness. Can you tell our viewers what exactly does that entail?
Well, it entails many things, but the goal is to be able to prevent morbidity and mortality in the setting of a unexpected catastrophic crisis, usually a public health emergency, a public health crisis. Whether it is pandemic flu, pandemic coronavirus, which affects very broad numbers of people across the US and the globe, or whether it's a more focused epidemic. That's what we do in emergency preparedness.
Is that what you were doing as part of the National Security Council's pandemic response team?
Yes, so at the NSC, the National Security Council staff, we coordinate policies. So we bring together all of the assets of the US government that have a role to play in biodefense. And I say biodefense because, biodefense is really, a lot of people think that it's, only addresses deliberate threats like bioterrorism. But biodefense really is agnostic to the origin of the threat. So our job is to prepare whether it's a man-made, an accidental, or a naturally occurring event. So we bring together all those components of the US government to work together to have a stronger biodefense enterprise for the American people.
And Dr. Borio, why does it seem that we were so unprepared for the current pandemic?
We were unprepared for the current pandemic. It's important to put it in perspective. This is the worst public health crisis in the last 100 years.
Wow.
So on the scale of 0 to 10, this is pretty close to a 10.
But
So
everyone does preparedness drills. Everyone, is talking about how do we, respond to these type of outbreaks. So why is it that we're unprepared?
Yeah, so it would have been challenging to any system that even, a system that was better prepared. I think it's important to just keep that perspective. That would have been challenging no matter what. But there are many things that we could have done better. I think one of the most important points where we, lost our footing was with the issue of diagnostic tests, not being able to rapidly augment, ramp up, distribute diagnostic tests to detect the cases, to conduct surveillance, to care for patients, to even facilitate the conduct of clinical studies. Diagnostic tests are the backbone.
What do you think, was the problem there? Just didn't do it correctly, or just lack of skills?
So two things. One, we always leverage the CDC to get us started, and they have always delivered. So it works well because one, they always deliver, and the demand for diagnostic tests at the early stages of, usually at the early stages of a new epidemic infectious diseases is not, super large like it is for a pandemic involving a respiratory disease. So the CDC, unfortunately, was not able to deliver us the tests that performed the way we needed them to perform. And because we have relied on the CDC, over and over again, the private sector was not really used to, rushing in at the earliest onset to deliver those tests either. The last time that we relied heavily on the private sector for those tests was during the 2009 H1N1 flu pandemic. But remember that a lot of these tests already existed in the marketplace because they were flu tests that had to be slightly modified to deal with the new strain. This was a new virus, and they had to start from scratch. They took their time.
Okay. So testing was an issue. What were the other issues?
I think the other issue was the failure to realize that by the time the epidemic was recognized in Eastern China, that given the features of this virus, highly transmissible respiratory disease, and given the travel volume between the US and China and the global how travel takes place nowadays, there was a failure of imagination to realize that this outbreak really seeded the globe pretty quickly. And by the time it was recognized, it was inevitable that cases were already circulating in small numbers pretty much across the globe. So focusing on the border issues may have helped delay the large introduction of cases into America, but it clearly was not going to be sufficient to contain it, and it's only a temporizing measure. We need to be able to look inward and begin to look for cases here.
Let's talk about what's on everyone's mind. How prepared are we today for the current pandemic, as well as potentially any resurgence or second wave?
Yeah, so I think we're only going to regain our economic and health security once we have a safe and effective vaccine that can be broadly distributed to the American population and actually across the globe. And there are many companies that are already, very avidly engaged in developing those vaccines. Now, nothing is certain about science. I think it's nice that everybody's leveraging the most advanced technologies that exist today, even those that may not have had a precedent, such as a licensed vaccine using a certain platform. We're still, trying to see if that might be the solution for this pandemic, and I think that's great.
But do we need to be practical, Dr. Borio, for a vaccine? Most experts, when you really start to unpack it, are saying it's at least 12 to 18 months for the broader population.
Absolutely. So it's going to take a while to be able to find out which vaccines work. And we can do it faster in a pandemic, sadly, because there's so many cases. So we're going to do the studies, but then you have to scale up manufacturing. A lot of the developers are already, establishing partnerships to do that, to be able to make a lot of it. They have to be placed in bottles. They have to find the needles and syringes. So there's a whole distribution around that too. So it's going to take a while to make it, to have enough safe and effective vaccine that can be given to everybody who needs it or wants it.
So what can viewers do? I mean, this is something that's going to be with us for a while. I think we have to be realistic, right? So we can't all stay, locked in, unable to have economic revival, access to food and exercise. So what do we do? Give us your advice.
So the way I like to think about this is that we're here today, and we know that we're not going to be able to go back to normal until we have a safe and effective vaccine. So what do we do in between, right? And there's a lot of confusion, I think, in people's minds about that. So look, in the beginning, we used a very blunt instrument, which is sheltering in place. And we like to say that we did that because we wanted to avert a catastrophic failure of the healthcare system. We wanted to flatten the curve. But we also did that because, we didn't know how to stop this outbreak, how to slow it down to save lives. So it's slow down, but it's a really blunt instrument. So the most important is, of course, for people that are sick to stay home, and for their contacts to quarantine themselves. And we know that most of the transmission really happens within household settings or congregate settings. We also have to recognize that a large number of people do not exhibit symptoms when they have this infection, and they may be transmitting. So they're contributing to the epidemic. So they must maintain some type of social distancing. This is not going to go away. The social distancing or physical distancing is not going to go away. We're going to have to wear masks. We're going to have to be really attentive to our environment, to environmental hygiene. And I think that the idea of being indoors with a lot of people is going to be a no-no for the foreseeable future.
How long's the foreseeable future?
Until we get a vaccine that is safe and effective.
You were chief scientist at FDA. You know that most trials fail. To do everything, right the first couple of times is hard. We definitely should have hope, but that's not a strategy. So what do you do if a vaccine isn't effective as much as we would like, or that it takes longer?
We have to be realistic and have other plans too. So I think that once we have a very safe and effective treatment, a therapeutic, I think it's going to be a game changer. And in the summer, we're going to begin to see a lot of monoclonal antibodies beginning to get tested. Right now, the scientists are really busy tweaking them, and it's bioengineering at its best. And those monoclonals are very potent, and they have they could really treat the infection, but they can also act as a vaccine, as a preventative to high risk, at risk populations, if you can make enough of it. So, I'm an optimist, and my job, at least, whether at the FDA or, the NSC staff, is always to think about, what do we do if something doesn't work? Like, how do we backstop the situation? And I think the monoclonals are going to be really critical.
What keeps Dr. Luciana Borio up at night?
These days, I think that we need to really remember that science and facts matter, and they should be able to. They must inform our actions. We always have options, a set of options to act upon, but they must be informed by the best available science. There's been a proliferation of clinical research that have been so poorly designed or so underpowered, and it really is a waste of resources, and it puts patients at risk needlessly, because these patients are volunteering for clinical research with the understanding that this clinical research is well done and it will generate knowledge that can benefit all of the population. So I'm really worried about this proliferation of poorly executed or designed research that distracts from our ability to find the cures that we need right now.
Are things going to look any different 3 months from now, or is that too soon to have any real impact?
I think we're going to be able to find this optimal balance. We're going to become more accustomed with the new normal that we are experiencing. I think people are going to recognize that there will be more social distancing, more telework, more use of face masks, that the risk outdoors is much smaller than the risk of indoor transmission. So people are going to be more comfortable in the outdoors, and they're going to, again, take more precautions indoors because it's needed. So I think that, eventually we're going to get this right. We're going to find out exactly what are the tools that we have that are going to work best, so that we don't have to feel that we're living under, in a horror movie sometimes.
Well, Dr. Borio, I want to thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, John.
And I want to thank you for watching Coronavirus in Context.